The NFL is a brutal business. We all know that. Of all the professional sports leagues in America, the NFL, by far, is the most cutthroat league of them all. If an NBA team drafts a player in the top 5 of the draft, say someone like Alonzo Ball, for example. Lonzo Ball actually may be a bad example since he was drafted by the Lakers in a rancid media market, but go with me here for a second and you'll see what I'm talking about. Lonzo Ball was drafted 2nd overall back in 2017. No one expected him to step in his rookie year and become an immediate impact type of player. No one expected him to step on the court and be a superstar type player. Hell, no one expects that of him now. And he's in his 3rd year in the league. Players drafted in the NBA get the benefit of time to develop and get better. It's not like that in the NFL, especially if you are a quarterback drafted in the top 5, top 10. Joe Burrow was drafted number 1 back in April by the fucking Bungles. Everyone outside of Cincinnati expects him to have a brutal rookie season. But let's pretend for a minute that Joe Burrow follows up his bad rookie year with a terrible sophomore season. Midway through that year, people will begin to speculate on the fact of whether or not Joe Burrow is a bust. Once a high draft pick like that in the NFL loses their starting job, it is unlikely that he will ever get that opportunity again. It's that quick in the NFL. If you're drafted top 5, top 10 as a quarterback, you've got 1, 2, maybe 3 years to prove yourself. If you don't, career over. As a starter or as a face of a franchise anyway. 2020 is a make or break season for about 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. Most of these guys are younger players. 3rd, 4th year guys. But one actually is a veteran player, possibly even a future Hall of Famer. I'm going to go over today the 5 quarterbacks in the NFL this year that I think are in situations where it's basically time to put up or shut up. Situations where if these guys don't prove themselves this season, their days as a starting quarterback are over and possibly could be the end of a career for one of these guys. Now, this list I'm going to give you is in no particular order. I'm going to start with Baker Mayfield in Cleveland. I say it all the time on this podcast. It is critical for young quarterbacks coming out of college to get drafted into the most ideal situation possible. For example, Jordan Love got drafted by the Packers this year. Even though it was later in the 1st round, he is in a much better situation than Joe Burrow's in with the Bungles. Jordan Love is drafted to a legendary franchise that expects to contend for a Super Bowl every year. Joe Burrow, on the other hand, is with a franchise that expects to compete for the number 1 pick in the draft every year. Big difference. Unfortunately, these guys have no control of where they're drafted, unless you're Eli Manning. And Baker Mayfield was drafted into a shitty situation in Cleveland. I mean, that's just the truth. He's going into his 3rd year in the league, and he is on his 4th head coach already. Went from Hugh Jackson to Greg Williams to Freddie Bum Kitchens, a guy who doesn't have business coaching a peewee football team, much less an NFL team. And now Baker Mayfield has Kevin Stefanski as his head coach. That type of instability is so detrimental to the development of a young quarterback. Every year, Baker Mayfield is tasked with learning a new offensive system, learning the tendencies of a new head coach. You look at the teams in the NFL that have sustained success. I'm not talking about one and done like the Raiders a couple of years ago where they made the playoffs and haven't made it since. I'm talking about sustained success. The New Englands, the New Orleans, the Seattles, the Kansas Cities. What do they all have in common? Stability at head coach. They have long-term head coaches in place. The instability in Cleveland isn't Baker Mayfield's fault, but Kevin Stefanski doesn't give a fuck about that. He doesn't give a fuck about the circumstances Baker Mayfield's first 2 years in the league. This is a make it or break it season for Baker Mayfield, and I think that he is on a short leash. I think he's got the first 4 games of the season to show Kevin Stefanski something. The Browns have a relatively easy schedule to open the year. Open up on the road against Baltimore. Back-to-back home games against the Bungles and the Redskins. Then they travel to Dallas to take on the Cowboys. I think the Browns should be 3-1 after that stretch. At worst, 2-2. But this is Cleveland that we're talking about. A team that finds ways to lose games. If Baker Mayfield starts the season like he did last year, throwing 6 interceptions in 4 games, struggling with his accuracy, there is not a doubt in my mind that Kevin Stefanski will yank him off the field and put a clipboard in his hands. Case Keenum will become the starter in Cleveland. And once that happens, Baker Mayfield's time in Cleveland is all but over. They can cut him after the season and take a dead cap hit of about $10 million, which isn't ideal by any stretch, but it's not the end of the world either. They've got Case Keenum through 2022 on a cheap-ass deal. So if he's playing well, they've got a cheap quarterback they can go with until Baker Mayfield's dead money clears the cap. Next up, Mitchell Trubisky in Chicago, coming off a disastrous 2019 season. And to be honest with you, he wasn't that great in 2018 either. The Chicago defense got them into the playoffs that year. But Mitchell Trubisky, coming off a disaster last year, Matt Nagy and the Bears went out and signed Nick Foles. So, I don't even know if Trubisky's going to be the fucking starter going into this season. His time as the starter in Chicago may already be over. But with the Bears coaching staff coming out and saying that if the team were practicing right now, Mitchell Trubisky would be getting the reps with the offensive starters, I will assume at this point that he'll be starting week 1. Just like Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, I feel like Mitchell Trubisky is on a short leash in Chicago. I think that he's going to have the first 4 games of the season to prove that he can lead this team. The Bears open up with the Lions, the Giants, Falcons, and the Colts. With the exception of Indianapolis, that's 3 shitty defenses that Trubisky should be able to score against. Now, if he doesn't, I don't think Matt Nagy will hesitate to put in Nick Foles because the schedule gets brutal after that for the Bears. Matt Nagy and the Bears defense cannot go through another season like they had in 2019. The Chicago defense was dominant. They were top 5 overall. Number 9 against the pass. Number 9 against the run. The Bears defense was the only reason that this team ended up 8-8 and had a shot at the playoffs towards the end of the year. Chicago lost 3 games last year where the defense gave up less than 20 points. Gave up 10 points to Green Bay. Lost because Mitchell Trubisky and the offense put up 3 fucking points at home. Gave up 17 to the Chargers. Lost. 17 to the Rams. Lost. You can't lose those type of games, especially with 2 of them coming at home. It is inexcusable. You could see at points last season where guys on that Chicago defense were becoming visibly frustrated with Mitchell Trubisky and the offense. The Bears defense, they were doing their job. They were getting stops, forcing turnovers. Turn around and be right back on the field 4 downs later because Mitchell Trubisky couldn't move the fucking ball down the field. That is frustrating to a defense. And what makes things worse for Mitchell Trubisky, this is the final year of his contract. Chicago had a team option for a 5th year in 2021. They said, no thanks, turned it down. We've seen enough. Trubisky might not even have the first 4 games of this season to prove himself. He could lose his job in training camp. Chicago is much more committed financially to Nick Foles than they are Mitchell Trubisky. They owe Foles $17 million over the next 3 years, whether he touches the fucking field or not. So, Mitchell Trubisky may already be on his way out of Chicago, but if he is given the opportunity, and that is a big if at this point, then he's not going to have much time to prove whether or not he can handle it. All right, next up, Jimmy G in San Francisco. Now, some of you might be wondering what the fuck I'm thinking, including him on this list. He just took the Niners to the Super Bowl. He's 21-6 as a starter, which is true. But I have seen no signs from Kyle Shanahan, or John Lynch for that matter, that they believe that Jimmy Garoppolo is the long-term answer in San Francisco. And the way his contract is structured proves that point. Technically, Jimmy G is signed with the Niners through 2022, but that's on paper only. The 49ers only owe him $15 million in guaranteed money, which will be paid out this season. Once that money is paid, they can release him with ease. They'd only take a cap hit at about $3 million on their cap for 2021. Look, I don't understand it. I don't know what more Jimmy Garoppolo needs to prove. Now, I know San Francisco, I know John Lynch likes to structure a lot of his contracts the way Jimmy G's contract is structured. They set up these deals so it benefits the team. Once a player begins to decline, they can release them with little to no repercussions, little to no consequence. But I think Jimmy G's the real deal. And I don't understand why Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch still don't believe in him. Last year was his first year as a full-time starter. It was essentially his rookie year. Now, in his first year as a starter, he beats Aaron Rodgers twice, Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, and Kirk Cousins. Hall of Famer, and Kirk Cousins. Pretty impressive list if you ask me. Led the Niners to a fucking Super Bowl. And he still doesn't get the respect he deserves. When Matt Ryan led the Falcons to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, gave up that 28-3 lead, Atlanta gave him a fucking contract extension. That hasn't happened for Jimmy Garoppolo. Instead, he is playing in what is essentially a contract year in San Francisco this year, where he has to prove himself once again to his own team. All right, let's move on. Let's get to Derek Carr. A guy on this list that should not come as much of a surprise to anyone. I think one of the worst contracts in the last decade was the extension the Raiders gave to Derek Carr back in 2017 after one decent year. Derek Carr is 39-55 as a starter. He's had one winning season in 6 years. Now, granted, he is playing for the Raiders, a franchise that is accustomed and known for losing. I mean, this is the same team that lost their final home game in Oakland last year to the fucking Jacksonville Jaguars. That's the Raider way. We want to thank all you fans in Oakland for the decades of support that you've given us. We're leaving you for Las Vegas, but we're going to go out here and we're going to leave you with what we do best. We're going to lose on our home field. That's what the Raiders do. They lose games. Now, John Gruden and the Raiders signing Marcus Mariota this offseason was not done by accident. I don't think they're bringing him in with a backup role in mind. I think Derek Carr's days in Oakland, Las Vegas, whatever the fuck. I think Derek Carr's days as a starter for the Raiders could be coming to an end. I think his days with the Raiders could be coming to an end. I think his make or break season is going to come somewhere else. He's going to have to prove himself with another team. And I'll tell you why I think that. On paper, Derek Carr is signed until 2022. Scheduled to make around $19 million this season. But only $3 million of that is guaranteed money. Meaning the Raiders could cut him before the season even begins and pay him that $3 million. Or they could trade him and eat that $3 million as dead money on their salary cap. They're paying Marcus Mariota $7.5 million this year. So they've guaranteed to pay Mariota more money than Derek Carr. Is there really that big of a difference on the field between Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota? I mean, Marcus Mariota, at least he's played in playoff games. The writing is on the fucking wall. Derek Carr's days in a Raider uniform are all but over. I think if it weren't for this COVID pandemic, the Raiders would have already traded him. There were rumors back in February during the Combine that he was on the trading block. Statistically, he had the best season of his career last year. So there might be a market for him as a starter somewhere else. Maybe a team like New England could be interested. If Jarrett Stidham's not working out in training camp, I mean, why not give Derek Carr a shot? Who knows? All I know is the Raiders are not committed to Derek Carr long term. All right, last but not least, Phillip Rivers. Obviously, this isn't a make or break season for Phillip Rivers to prove himself as a starter. A guy like Phillip Rivers is not going to be a backup somewhere. But this is a make or break season for the continuance of his career. Phillip Rivers puts up big numbers, but it doesn't translate to wins. He's been to the playoffs twice in the last 10 years. 3 losing seasons in the last 5 years. He's a turnover machine. He would have led the league in interceptions for the 3rd time last year, but Jameis Winston decided that it was his turn to do that instead. I know Phillip Rivers is likely a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like I said, he puts up big numbers, looks impressive on paper. But he's 38 years old. And unlike Tom Brady and Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers is losing more than he's winning. I feel bad for Jacoby Brissett because I think the Colts would have been a playoff team last year had it not been for the injuries to half the fucking starting lineup. Frank Reich brought in Phillip Rivers because he knows that he has a Super Bowl caliber roster. And they do in Indianapolis. They are a good team. And Frank Reich thinks that Phillip Rivers can get them there. So Phillip Rivers has this season to prove that he's still got it. There won't be any more excuses being made for him. We don't have a running game with the Chargers. Offensive line is terrible. Defense can't stop anyone. None of that will be the case in Indianapolis as long as they stay healthy. Colts have a great defense, great running game. Offensive line, one of the best in the league. Putting up 4,000 yards passing and going 5-11 is not going to cut it for Phillip Rivers in Indianapolis. I don't want to say that it's Super Bowl or bust, but if Phillip Rivers can't lead this Colts roster to a deep playoff run, 2020 could be his final season in the NFL altogether. That's all for today. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for me. You can click that notification bell if you want to receive all updates from the channel. Appreciate those of you that have already done so. I thank you for the support. Leave me a comment in the section below. Let me know what you think about the 5 quarterbacks on my list. Do you agree with me that it's a make or break season for each of these guys? And if you disagree with me, let me know why. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. If you have any questions, you can email them to BTLKC84@gmail.com. I will see you guys next time.